to Forever Blueshirts. I am Jim Cerny, and he is Kenny Albert. Kenny, thanks for a few minutes today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
So let's see. TV guy, radio guy. Now you're an author as well. A Mike for All Seasons, your autobiography. Pretty cool. You sent me over a copy. I'm diligently reading it as we've gone back and forth about it. But what was that process like for you? Just starting off talking about the book.
Well, first of all, it is so strange when people refer to me as an author. For 33 years, I've done pretty much one job, and that's play-by-play at various places and with various teams and networks. And all of a sudden, to add author to the business card is sort of surreal. It was a fun process. I know you've been involved in writing for a long time. I had done a lot of writing back in my high school and college days, covering various sporting events. But to take on a project such as this was pretty daunting. And I thought about it for a long time. I had a lot of stories, stored up in my head. Speak at various sportscasting camps and on interviews throughout the year annually, and always wind up telling a lot of those stories and answering a lot of the same questions. So I figured, why not try and put pen to paper at some point? And my family was sort of pushing me to do it, my wife and kids, and never really felt like I had the time. And then when the pandemic hit, all of a sudden we were all home for a stretch of weeks, which turned into months. And I had been contacted by a book agent about a decade ago. Andrew Blauner works out of New York, Blauner Books, and he's a big sports fan. And he told me, if you ever think about writing a book, why don't you contact me and we'll try and connect you with a publisher. And that's exactly what we did. Triumph Books out of Chicago took on the project, and they basically said, get us 70,000 words by September 1st, 2022. And this was April or May of 2020. So sat down with a big manila folder and wrote down about 200 keywords, phrases, stories, a word that would remind me of a specific story. And I put together an outline, and I started writing, about 12 or 13 different chapters separately. A chapter on hockey, for example, a chapter on the Olympics, a chapter on the other sports that I've been involved in, a chapter on early life, a chapter on travel stories, a chapter on the pandemic and how we did things in the broadcast world, a chapter on favorite games, a chapter on color analysts. And I remember at one point I would scratch the keywords off the folder whenever I typed a specific story in one of those chapters. And then I remember, I think it was during the summer of 2021, I said to myself, I have these 12 or 13 distinct separate chapters. I have to kind of tie it all together. And when we were all young, you learned about a beginning, a middle, and an end. So merge the files together. So now all of a sudden it felt more like an actual book. And there was a lot of overlap and redundancy, and I had to fix all that. I remember at one point, looking up at the upper right corner of my laptop where it counted the words, and it was 30,000. And I remember thinking to myself, how am I ever going to get to 70,000? But sure enough, I wound up with about 80,000 when all was said and done. And then we went through the editing process, and that was challenging because Triumph, sent it back to me, downloaded it on my iPad, and probably read through it about 20 times. And each and every time you find something, whether a factual error, a spelling error, a grammatical error, things that I didn't catch while I was writing it or in the prior 10 reads, for example. So the editing process is probably a bigger challenge than the actual writing of the book, but it was a lot of fun to reminisce about the stories. And I know you know so many of the names in there. And then to see it last August when it first arrived at my house in book form was just so special. And we had a friends and family party in September, and then the official launch date was in October. And I've had a lot of fun, doing various interviews. We've had some events at the NHL store and some other bookstores in the area. So I know it's a long answer to a short question, but a lot of fun. Somehow I got to about 80,000 words, and hopefully I didn't leave any key stories out.
2,000 words. So that's about a period and a half if Pete Stemkowski is your color commentator. And that's what he says.
Stemmer's in the
Those are
book.
his words.
Couple of Stemmer stories made it in.
You could do, and I think we could combine and doing a whole book on Stemmer stories, to say the least. So it's really cool, and this was before my time, before I worked for the Rangers, so I didn't know this about your relationship with Wayne Gretzky and the flights and how you sat together and talked all kinds of sports. Basically, you helped take his mind off of the fact that he was flying because he wasn't a good flyer, like John Tortorella was, and he's another guy who didn't like the long flights. Tell me a little bit about that and kind of a if that's 1A of the question, 1B would be clearly Gretzky. That's a special Ranger to you. But is there somebody else along the way, maybe a lesser known name from your days with the Rangers that kind of a relationship that you built that's special to you?
Well, first of all, to answer the initial part of the question, Jim, about Wayne Gretzky, who you and I both grew up watching, during his heyday with the Edmonton Oilers in the 80s. I won't take as much credit as maybe he remembers for all of us, the broadcasters, helping him get through those flights. But back then, the Garden owned a plane. Now a lot of the teams use Delta or one of the other airlines for their charters. But back then, the Garden owned a plane, and the coaches and staff would sit in the front, the trainers and broadcasters in the middle, and then the players in the back. And this is when John Davidson and Sal Messina were part of our broadcast crew. And of course, Sam Rosen. And I was doing the radio with Sal, and Sam and JD were the TV team. And Wayne, it's been well documented, is not a huge fan of flying. And he would come up and always sit next to JD. They were really close. The other three of us, Sam, Sal, and I, were probably more like flies on the wall listening into the conversation. But he would include us, of course. But he came up to kind of get his mind off the flight, and I'll say it was 90% to chat with JD. But Wayne is gracious enough when he tells the story that he came up to sit with all of us and chat during the flights those 3 years. But to have Wayne Gretzky and Walt Clyde Frazier write the forwards, again, is just surreal. I've had the great opportunity to work with Clyde for the last 15 years or so, about 15 games per season, and have really gotten to know Wayne a lot better during the 3 years now at TNT. He's a part of the studio crew, and they've traveled with us during the playoffs. So I had about a 10-day stretch in Colorado 2 years ago, Colorado-Edmonton series, and then last year during the Vegas-Florida Stanley Cup final, where Wayne and Liam McHugh and Rick Tocchet, Henrik Lundqvist, Paul Bissonnette, Anson Carter, the whole pregame crew, would be around us, the game crew, all the time, and we'd have meals together and flights together. So he's such a great person, as you know, even a better person than he was a player, which is hard, pretty hard statement to make, but it's true. As far as other Rangers, I'd have to say my broadcast partner, Dave Maloney. We've worked together now for 19 years, and again, you won't find a better person than Wayne or Dave. And you traveled with the team for a long time, and Dave. I knew him a little bit during his playing days, and then when he was working on Wall Street for 20 years, he did some TV work with Fox, and now with the Rangers since 2005. So I've worked more games with Dave than anybody else in my broadcast career, because it's been 19 years and it's 50 or 60 games a year. So, he's obviously very special. Being around the core of the team that won the Cup in 94, I came in 95, 96. But a lot of those guys were still there. So, between Mark Messier, Wayne Gretzky, Mike Richter, Gretzky, of course, not on the Cup team, but on the team starting in 96, 97. But Messier, Graves, Richter, Leach, when I think back, Kevin Lowe and some of the others, just to be there and watching those guys play day in and day out. One of the stories I wrote in the book had to do with Mark Messier. And I forget the exact season. It was in the late 90s. I wrote down the exact dates in the book. It was a Ranger trip, December of one of those years in the late 90s, where the team played in Vancouver, had an off day, a travel day, and then Edmonton the next night. And there were 5 or 6 guys on the team who had played for the Oilers. So they all had friends or family in Edmonton waiting to have dinner on the off day. And the team was scheduled to fly from Vancouver to Edmonton, let's say at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So we would land at 2 or 3, and the guys would all, go about their plans. We were on the charter, and it turned out there was a mechanical issue, and time was ticking, and all of a sudden it's 1:30, 2 o'clock, and it's apparent that the charter is not going to go for a while. They received word that there were parts on the way, but it might be 4 hours until the Ranger charter left for Edmonton. And the traveling secretary at the time, Matthew Loughran, arranged for a commercial flight for the 5 or 6 guys who had played for the Oilers so that they can get in time to go to dinner with their friends and family. And Mark Messier stood up at the front of the plane. He said, "No, we go as a team. We're not going ahead of the rest of the team." And that's just an example of his, remarkable leadership and character, that he was not going to accept the team splitting up and 5 or 6 guys going early and the rest of the team getting to Edmonton later. So that's certainly a story that stands out. But the Henrik Lundqvist era, so many great memories, playoff games, game sevens. Dave and I started working together in 05-06, and I remember that first game in Philadelphia. Kevin Weeks started in goal that day. Henrik was the backup, but it was his first time wearing a Ranger jersey in a regular season game. And they won that game 5-3. Jágr scored a couple of goals. Jason Strudwick scored the first goal of the season for the Rangers. And that team did not have high expectations. Tom Redding was the head coach, and they wound up making the playoffs that year. And just to watch Henrik's development, becoming the starter, pretty early in the season, the year that Jágr had with the franchise record 54 goals. But thinking back, they made the playoffs 11 of the first 12 years with Henrik in goal. And for the most part, they weren't a team that scored a lot of goals. They didn't have, after Jágr left and Shanahan was there, they would win games 2-1, 1-0. And there were so many of those seasons that would go down to game 81 or game 82. And Henrik would steal a game and then steal a game 7. So just that entire era, going to the conference final in 2012, the Stanley Cup final in 14, the conference final again in 15, the run in 2022 when they won the first 2 games of the conference final against Tampa. Just so many great memories, overtime goals, Brad Richards, Mark Stahl, Derek Stepan, so many big ones when I think back to that period of Rangers hockey.
And, a big part of that era of Rangers hockey, the one you were just talking about, were all those series against the Caps, Torts, squeezing the water bottle on the fans, in Washington, and, then all the game 7s, the comeback down 3-1, Stepan winning game 7 in overtime, and, just so many amazing memories there. But that kind of fast forwards us to, here we go, Rangers Caps. It's hard to believe it's been 9 years since the last time they were in the playoffs, because there for a stretch, we were seeing them every year, those 2 teams in the postseason. So kind of, quick thoughts here. On paper, Rangers are just the superior team here. There's no doubt. But it's the Stanley Cup playoffs. And we've said this before about other series, Boston Bruins a year ago. So you tell me what you see here in this series developing. Can it be, or will it be, as much of a mismatch as it is on paper?
Well, just to go back to some of your thoughts, I remember clearly the Torts water bottle incident, the Stepan overtime goal, the comebacks from 3-1, also the Marian Gaborik triple overtime goal in Washington. That one ended pretty late. I remember walking back with Dave about 2 a.m. from the arena to the hotel, walking by the White House middle of the night. I remember the Sergei Fedorov game winner.
That Ryan McDonough played nearly an hour's worth of hockey that night. Right. Remember, he was just under an hour in that triple OT game.
Yeah, he did. I remember the Sergei Fedorov game winner in one of the other series in game 7. The Ovechkin, scoring, skating by Henrik, all series, baby. And then the Rangers wound up coming back and winning that series. So a lot of great memories. It's hard to believe it's been 9 years. It's also hard to believe it's been 30 years since the Ranger Islanders series, which we could see if the Rangers and Islanders both win their first round matchups. So many good storylines. You have the Lindgren brothers, Ryan and his brother Charlie, in goal for the Caps. You have Peter Laviolette coaching against Washington the team that he coached last year. So, you know, the storylines are plenty. The Rangers certainly the favorites. They won the President's Trophy, so they have to be. You have to give the Caps a lot of credit for battling. You know, I think 6 weeks ago, if somebody told you the Islanders and the Capitals would make the playoffs, you wouldn't have thought so at that point. And what a crazy night it was. As we record this, it was last night with the Philadelphia, Detroit, Washington, Philadelphia game all going on at once. But you know, it should be a fun series. There are probably 12 teams that legitimately think they can win the Stanley Cup of the 16 that are in the playoffs. And you know, it's crazy, Jim, that you look at Boston, Toronto, and Florida, Tampa, and two of those teams will lose in the first round. And those losing teams probably feel right now that they can win the cup. So,
right.
You know, with the parity and the way the NHL is now, you know, the other thing I find ironic is in the East, if you take the four series, the four matchups, they would be the exact same matchups if it was the old 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7, 3, 6, and 4, 5. It won't be that way in the West, but it would be the exact same matchups in the East. So really looking forward to this series and whatever other ones that I'm involved in on the TV side as well.
Well, yeah, you do this, you know, the bouncing back and forth. Are you going to do, well, let's see. No, then you got the Knicks going on too. So 93, 94, and now, you know, that season heading into that postseason and then this postseason, the similarities to me are striking. To me, it's the first time really in 30 years that you can say, boy, Rangers, Knicks going into the postseason, and boy, do they both have a chance to win it all,
Yeah,
right? This hasn't happened since.
They both absolutely do. The Knicks won 50 games, doing it the last 2 months without a number of key players in the lineup. They finished with the second seed in the East. The Rangers win the President's Trophy, franchise record, 55 wins, 114 points. You know, when I think back to that spring of 94, and I wasn't living here at the time, I was living in DC, but I was in New York a lot because working for the Capitals then, they played the Rangers in the second round. So I was up for those games and then wound up working the final on NHL radio with Sherry Ross. Was not up for any of the Ranger Devil games. I watched most of them on TV down in the DC, Maryland area. Believe it or not, they weren't all available on TV back then, out of town. So that was such a fun time. And with the Knicks playing every other night and the Rangers, you know, on the other nights, I remember being out in Vancouver and watching one of the Knicks games against Indiana, I guess, as they wrap things up in the Eastern Conference Final. And then, of course, the Rangers won on a Tuesday, June 14th, and then the Knicks had a home game, game 4 on the 15th, and Messier brought the cup out to center court. I was at that game as a fan. And then the Ranger Parade is on Friday the 17th, and that night is the Knicks game 5 and the OJ chase as well, ironically.
Yeah, there was a lot going on during that time. But yeah, you know, now we bring it 30 years later and we don't know how it's going to play out. We don't have the script, but it's the first time that you get that feeling that, boy, each of these teams really has a great chance at this. And this, I'll admit, this Ranger team seems to have a certain something extra. And, you know, I was around those teams, you know, 2012, 14 when they went to the Cup final, 15 when they won the President's Trophy. And I thought that 2014-15 team was better than the team that went to the Stanley Cup final. Been around, you know, all those teams. This one has a certain something. And it's those teams that stand out to me where you can't find the right word. Say, what is the certain something? But they've got it. And those are the teams that end up being usually pretty special. And you're around them more on a regular basis. So do you have that sense as well? Again, we can't predict who's going to win, who's not going to win, you know, who's going to get hurt, who's not going to get hurt, all that kind of stuff that affects the end result. But do you have that sense as well that there's a certain something going on there in that room that they take out onto the ice as well?
I do, and I really don't think they have any holes. you look at from the goaltending on out, Shesterkin's a Vezina Trophy winner. Had that little blip in the middle of the season, but was great over the last month and a half. I thought in the last regular season game against Ottawa, you just got the feeling he wasn't letting anything in. He was that good. And then, who knows? Of course, knock on wood, barring any injury, who knows if we'll even see Jonathan Quick play in a game during the postseason. But he was tremendous coming in as a backup, winning 18 games, 18 of his 26 starts. Such a good guy in the room from all indications. He won the Players' Player Award. I think on defense, from 1 to 6 or even 1 to 7, I don't see any other team that matches up with the depth that they have with Fox and Lindgren, and then whether Miller plays with Schneider or Trouba at the start, and then you have Gustafsson and Ruhwedel as the 7th defenseman. You have a veteran who's won Stanley Cups. And then up front, you have superstars all over the place on the top 2 lines. The guy in Artemi Panarin, who should get consideration for MVP votes, whether he wins it or not, we'll see. But 120 points for the President's Trophy winning team, not too bad. You have Mika Zibanejad, who had another really consistent year. I know maybe the even strength goals weren't what you would hope for, but overall, he's a #1 center in the league. And Chris Kreider, 39 goals, one of the best guys in the league in front of the net on the power play. Trocheck, Panarin, and Lafreniere. I don't have to tell you how good they were this year. Really like what I've seen from that Cooley, Kakko, Wenberg, 3rd line. And then you can mix and match on the 4th line with Goodrow, Vesey, Rempe, and Brodzinski. So really no holes. Special teams are outstanding all year. The one area you probably hope that they can raise a little bit is the 5-on-5 scoring. They were finished the year +3 or 4. It was even going into the last game. But really, like I said, you can't really find a hole anywhere on that roster. And coaching staff has done a tremendous job. Peter Laviolette has won Stanley Cup. He's gotten to the final with 2 other teams. Excellent assistant coaches in Phil Housley and Mike Pekka, Dan Muse, Benoit Allaire, the goalie coach. So, again, there are several other teams in the East that probably think they can go all the way, but in my mind, the Rangers certainly have as good a chance as anybody.
Yeah. Give me a prediction on the series, first round.
I try to stay away from predictions, Jim, only because I have to call the games. But, I would certainly be surprised if the Rangers didn't win the series just because of the regular season they had. And you have to give the Caps so much credit for what they've been able to do this year, getting into the playoffs. Spencer Carberry did a terrific job. You look at the second half of the season that Ovechkin had. But again, I try to stay away from predictions. In the other division, I think both are too close to call. Boston, Toronto, Florida, Tampa. Look at what the Islanders, the hard time they gave Carolina last year. They were an overtime goal away from forcing a Game 7. So it's the best time of year, and really looking forward to it. And it should be some really fun nights, not only at Madison Square Garden, but all around the league coming up over this the next weeks and potentially months.
A few frequent flyer miles for you as well, of course, going East Coast, West, going East, West, TV, radio, doing a little bit of everything. Is there, as you go back, and this kind of ties into the book as well, too, but is there a most memorable, and we'll stick to hockey, because obviously you've done all the sports, but is there a most memorable moment for you, hockey call for you?
Well, I mentioned earlier, I was on the call for NHL radio when the Rangers won the Cup in '94. So that would obviously have to be right at the top of the list, winning for the first time in 54 years and doing it against the team I rooted for as a youngster, the Canucks as well. And the Ranger playoff runs we talked about, the deep runs, but also calling the Stanley Cup final on TV 2 of the last 3 years when Tampa Bay won in 2021 and then Vegas last year, working those series on the TV side, have worked 8 Stanley Cup final series on the radio side as well. Olympic hockey, I've had the good fortune to call hockey at the last 6 Winter Olympics, some gold medal games on both the men's and women's side. The women's gold medal game in Pyeongchang, South Korea in 2018 is right up there when the U.S. won in a shootout against Canada. So those would be the moments certainly at the top. Some memorable overtime games as well earlier in playoffs. I had the 4 overtime game in Carolina last year. Matthew Tkachuk won it for the Panthers against the Hurricanes in game 1 of their series. So it's hard to narrow it down to one, but the games that I mentioned are certainly up there on my list.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's see if I can get this on the camera here. Who is that guy? Look at that. A Mike for all seasons.
Not sure.
That is Kenny Albert's autobiography. And we'll be following you the next couple months, with the Rangers, of course, but also, your great TV work, and then onto the baseball and onto the NFL season and all that. We didn't even get into that stuff. That'll be our next conversation. But I know you got a game to call tonight. You got to save those golden pipes of yours. So all I can say is, as I wrap it up, is thanks a lot for your time today, Kenny, and really appreciate it, just hanging out and chatting a little bit.
Thanks, Jim. Really appreciate it. And for those viewers who have either had the chance to pick up the book or will pick it up, the highlight, make sure to read about the helicopter ride that I took with Jim Cerny and 4 members of the Rangers back about 10 or 11 years ago.
Yeah. When he tells the story to everybody else, it's like, I took this helicopter ride with Henrik Lundqvist and who else? Other guys were on it. But here, being as smooth as Kenny is, it's, I took the helicopter ride with Cerny, and some other Rangers were on board.
And I even spelled your name correctly in the book.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness. My wife would hunt you down otherwise. Thanks for a few minutes again today, Kenny. Really appreciate it. And best of luck with the book.
All right. Thanks, Jimmy.